Okay, so welcome everybody, dear audience. Welcome to this webinar, Free Up Cash. Is it time to redesign your inventory strategy? Thanks for joining us. I'm not alone. We are here together with three speakers, two fellow speakers, one of which is my colleague Miguel van As, head of Alders Data Analytics. And we also invited Jason Flake from Lamasoft, a Coupa company, to join us in this webinar. First of all, some practical details for your interests. The recording will be made available after this webinar. So if you want to share it with other colleagues or rewatch it, please do. Also check out our website on www.alders.com. We are also sharing on this website some other topics on supply chain management besides inventory management and optimization. Should you lose connection, please rejoin us via our email invitation link. This will lead you back to the Zoom meeting that we are conducting here. So without further ado, let's kick this off. And we would like to start with the agenda of today. So the first part, I will take that for my account. I will highlight a little bit what inventory management is all about, what also the pitfalls, and what the solution could look like. Next proceeding is Jason. He will take his part on the today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities, also highlighting a little bit the technology side of it, the technology perspective. Followed by Miguel van As, who will showcase the business case with an interactive showcase, let's say, of optimizing working capital for a chemical distributor, a customer of ours. After which we will save some time for a Q&A, of course. So on that topic, please, if you have some questions, if you have some remarks, some doubts, whatever, just post them on the Q&A board. If we have time, we can address them during the webinar. Otherwise, we will, as it, save some time to do it afterwards. Now, just to have also a little bit of a brief introduction and an overview and a setting of the scene, I would like to also introduce a little bit Alders. So for people who don't know Alders, we are a logistics service provider, and we focus on logistics, transportation, warehousing in difficult regions. And for example, Russia, CIS countries, but also in the Far East. We are very much present there to help our customers streamline their supply chain. Now, next to that, we also engage in intricate supply chain advisory and supply chain consulting projects, purely because of the fact that our customers trust us, but also have confidence in our capabilities to do this type of projects and optimize, model, simulate certain scenarios to help them build up that digital supply chain twin. Also for the fact that we also already exist more than 110 years, so we already know a lot about how supply chain, how logistics work. Well, on top of that, being able also to model the supply chain gives us a very unique position to give the control back to our customers on their supply chain decision making. Now, the goal of this webinar, of this joint webinar, is to highlight a very important topic, of course, for everybody here present. I think this is not, it's not a surprise, but inventory optimization, inventory management is a very, very big topic, a very crucial topic in the supply chain in general, in your network. We do this joint webinar because we would like to highlight this and look at it from two sides, from the business case, from the business side of it. How do you help the customer by visualizing and also showing what the bottlenecks are and what to do about it, but also from a technology side of it. Therefore, we asked our long-term partner Lamasoft to join us in this webinar and give their insight also on the topic. Lamasoft is a very innovative technology solution provider that focuses on modeling, optimization, simulation of the end-to-end supply chain networks in order to facilitate the platform to make the decisions. So on the inventory management side, on inventory optimization, quite often, even among well-run businesses, the actual costs of inventory is inaccurate, underestimated, and even incomplete. Our experience, and this is also backed by numerous other studies, show that the efficiency gap between the current inventory policies and also the current inventory management, the gap between that and an optimized, a fully optimized inventory strategy can range between 20 to 30%. Now that is a lot of money, of course. And that is also why we see that inventory costs a lot of money, but it is not as easy as just putting the unit cost together and have that as a sum of your inventory costs. That is a little bit too short-sighted. There are a lot of other hidden costs that are related to inventory and that do not come up in standard reporting. I'm talking about opportunity costs, cost of capital, but also discount costs, costs of extra warehousing, even extra handling costs and damage costs. So on top of that, you have also typically a decentralized planning, a decentralization of inventory management, which is also resulting in an inefficient but also siloed view of your total supply chain network. And that is a real opportunity here. So the real question is that everybody wants to be answered is, how can I minimize inventory levels, but at the same time, be able to respond quickly and swiftly to the immediate demands of the customer, which is the ultimate goal, of course. Well, the best way to do this is to create a synergy and a cooperation across all key contributors to your supply chain. And what better way to do that is to build up that platform, that digital supply chain twin of your end-to-end supply chain and your network, also using that technology enabler. It's crucial to facilitate that platform, and it is also very crucial to have that holistic view in place, because in any way, there are a lot of actions that has been taken or will be taken today and tomorrow that has an impact on the actions, but also on the network. So being able to have that holistic view, but also to be able to drill down to certain specifics of your network and also to localize the bottlenecks is really the key here to have that inventory strategy streamlined. And if you have even the possibility to simulate some scenarios, simulate internal but also external factors that change your supply chain, and also the inventory management, of course, that gives you a very competitive advantage on your position in the market. So talking about that supply chain digital twin, let's say, I think this is the best opportunity to give the virtual floor to our speaker from Lamasoft, a Coupa company, Jason Flake, who will gladly share his view on the technology side of it. How does this resonate within the technology stack of Lamasoft, and how fast are things going in the market? So Jason, up to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm honored to be part of this webinar, and I've promised both Miguel and Kevin that I will not take too much time so that we can get to the use case. As a form of brief introduction, my name is Jason Flake. I'm part of the Lamasoft Coupa Customer Success Strategy team in the EMEA region. And I'm not as old as Allers, 110 years we just heard, but for 25 years I've been working in the supply chain space, focusing on optimization and application of technology. And I've worked in product development, in consulting and implementation, in pre-sales, and now I'm on the post-sales customer success side of the business. So first, I'd like to share a little bit of information about the technology leveraged by Allers to perform value-added services for their customers. We've already had some of an introduction, but LLamasoft is a leader, I think, and recognized as a pioneer in many ways in the space of supply chain design. And we've been evolving and innovating in the space for 20 years. And we started out, from left to right on the slides is the progression, but really we started out in simulation. And this is an area where really discrete event simulation, which enabled us to start our path at a level of data granularity, which has been very key for us to reaching the right-hand side of the slide here. But moving from simulation, a natural progression for us was to be moving into network optimization. And so really with a focus on strategic flow optimization models, but then we could also utilize that on the same data model in combination with simulation, for example, to play out the results of those scenarios in more detail, to perform sensitivity analysis and simulate what the future network would look like or perform as. Moving into the middle box is where we've added additional algorithms and solving capabilities. So we've brought in transportation optimization, brought in specific inventory optimization approaches, but all into the same solution and the same data model, which brings us to, I think, what LLamasoft is probably most known for in the definition of supply chain design and all of those capabilities that we bring to bear in that area. Over the years, our customers' needs or the supply chains of our customers' needs expanded beyond a periodic and strategic analysis to address occasional problems, to really move to more increasingly tactical supply chain questions that needed to be analyzed and revisited at a higher frequency across multiple time horizons. And so this resulted in really a wide range of use cases that we enabled in the supply chain design space. And that can then be applied upon the data model, which ultimately could be termed as a supply chain digital twin, as was mentioned before. Moving into the fourth box, artificial intelligence, machine learning, more than buzzwords. They've been a big focus and a major focus of our evolution over the past 3 to 4 years. And it's all about enabling first predictive and then prescriptive analytics, but with really a focus on supply chain is where we're coming from, right? So we're looking at predicting, demand, volume, labor requirements, determining root causes of delayed shipments, which that goes beyond the scope of supply chain design. And it's a very exciting area for us. And from an inventory perspective, also looking at applying machine learning techniques to determine inventory policies. So ultimately, this has brought us from, let's say, desktop software, a modeling tool, you could call it, but now to an enterprise, cloud-based enterprise solution and a decisioning platform. And the vision that we are bringing is to democratize the impact of algorithms and the smart math and insights in the supply chain, such that the power of the models shouldn't be in the hands or limited to a few people. And if we can realize this living baseline, this digital twin, we can build upon that personalized decisioning apps, micro apps that are dedicated to looking at, for example, specific supply chain policies that can be continuously monitored, governed, predicted, and optimized. Okay. So next slide, please. All right, supply chains, of course, anyone could be talking about this, becoming more and more complex, but we wanted to layer on what we see looking across our customers. And so here we have some averages of the entities across our customer base that we have visibility of. And, of course, combining all of the different potential paths through these, it comes up to an intractable number of potential options and flows that could be looked at. And which is why we apply and you apply, computers to many different problems in supply chain. But more importantly, looking at inventory, which Kevin alluded to earlier, is that through all of our experience in 2020 and before, things are more volatile and we are more exposed to risk. There's proliferation of SKUs and multi-tiers within the supply chain, omni-channels to get to market, disruptions in supply and capacity, and this all increases a focus on inventory, as well as customer demands on service requirements and even stock out penalties can be increasing. So from a long-term inventory perspective, one way to prevent against risk is to establish redundancy in the network, right? But that requires capital investment, of course. And in the near term, right, you already have working capital tied up in inventory. And so the key question to address is, hey, am I making the best of this capital that's tied up, right? And if you're not making the best use of that, then there are some approaches and best practices that you can leverage to streamline the inventory. Right? So there's good inventory, there's bad inventory, and to find the bad inventory, right, you could think of, for example, evaluating your assortment of SKUs. What is the inventory impact of similar SKUs in the portfolio? A good first step when embarking on inventory optimization, or really any supply chain network design or optimization study, is to go beyond just an as-is baseline of the supply chain, but really to develop a clear understanding of the margin and cost profiles of all of your products. And a great way to achieve this is by leveraging total landed cost to serve models. So looking at that total cost to serve each customer, each type of product across the network, and knowing how much of that could be attributed to procurement, to production, transportation, inventory fulfillment, and some of those hidden costs that were mentioned earlier as well, specifically within the inventory realm. And as I said, this goes beyond the baseline, but it's an additional analysis which is often performed to understand the relationships, right, between all of the various cost components. And the reason this is so important is this is what drives insights. We want to be able to shine a light on any product consumer combination that is bleeding money out of the supply chain, right, or which are candidates for rationalizing the assortment, or for repositioning, or even reevaluating inventory policies and strategies, right? So where are we going to stock or buffer, define or push and pull, or apply late differentiation strategies, for example, right? So what this really comes down to is the holy grail of where we want to be, even when we're looking at inventory, is to have a holistic approach, right? Because that provides the visibility of the impact of those inventory policies across the end-to-end supply chain. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so if we look at, I would say, example, safety stock approach, we ended on the last slide with talking about the total landed cost to serve as gaining some original insights. And from this, we developed the detailed view of not only the cost of inventory, but the impact it has on overall margins and service levels at a granular level. Right, and so at this point, then you can start to address some of the questions of, how much safety stock do I need? What's the proper cycle stock required? And this can often be combined with studies, other types of network design studies, such as rationalizing a warehousing footprint. Right, so how many warehouses or what capacity do I need? What's my product allocation across these warehouses? And in a multi-echelon environment, then looking at the multi-echelon inventory positioning and optimizing that across the network. So it's not one size fits all approach, but there are many flavors of this. But in what we've seen with our customers, if you can really be methodical about it, there's tremendous opportunity to echo what Kevin said earlier, to free up working capital. And based on our experience, we can see freeing up capital of 10 to 20%, which is quite significant. And so the process that I'm showing here it's high level, but ultimately, it starts with a demand analysis, which provides statistics and then allow us to determine the classification of demand. The description of the demand patterns. Are we talking about slow, smooth, erratic, lumpy, etc.? And then in addition to looking at the demand, we are also looking at the sourcing and production and lead time variabilities, right? So that is undertaken and it's considered within the determination of optimal inventory policies. Right, so for example, in the lead time distribution, it could be representing the demand pattern between the resupply points within the supply chain and assigning, appropriate normal gamma binomial distributions, which can then impact the follow-on optimization. So a result of this process, then looking over to the right of the slide, here's a little screenshot of one output, is getting computation of an optimized safety stock, and the cost of inventory, a recommended inventory policy. And this is for each product, site, and time period combination, right? And then even including the potential policy parameters for that recommended inventory policy, such as the reorder points and reorder quantity for an RQ policy. All right, next slide, please. So building down below is then, kind of a repeat of, these recommended inventory policies then need to be reviewed in combination with policies across the entire supply chain. And of course, policies conflict. Otherwise, all of our jobs would be pretty easy, and we could just, solve our little problems. But because, if you change a sourcing policy, there's going to be a ripple effect impacting, inventory and impacting transportation, et cetera. And so these cascading effects is what really makes the impact of getting these policies wrong, I would say, pretty drastic in lost revenue, obsolescence, increased variability, impact on lead times, or your profitability, could be the result of getting these things wrong. And then the diagram here isn't meant to be an exhaustive list. Everyone has their own various policies, but we wanted to just bring out some examples and highlight those. But more importantly, for everyone watching the webinar, ask the question to yourselves, for these policies or other policies, what are the policies in my supply chain? And is there a quick answer to this? And I think our experience, and I'm guessing yours is as well, is that it's typically not a quick or easy answer. It's difficult to get what those policies are today, but then the interesting thing is, where should they be tomorrow? Right? So it's challenging overall. I'll provide, let me check. I have time to provide one example. In inventory, for example, right? So these are real world problems from customers, and whether it's a policy or behavior, they have big impacts. So here's one that it wouldn't be recommended, and it's more of a policy. But let's say you're getting towards the end of a fiscal year, and you've got a 50-day inventory policy for the books on the reporting side, that you might tend to take actions to try to bring it down to 45 days to make things look better, right, at the end of the year. But that, of course, then has the ripple effects and impacts on the early part of next year. Right, so that's kind of an extreme example of a behavior, but that I think gives some insight into why just defining a policy and saying this is the policy isn't as easy as it is on face value. Right, so there could be a whole nother session on what we do to try to extract and understand what the policies are from the data, but that's for a different story, right? But ultimately, the first thing to focus on and ask is, what is the business objective when we're looking at taking recommended inventory policies and impacts and on others, and then to proceed with that impact analysis on the supply chain with those objectives in mind, right? And so that really can't be done unless you look holistically at the supply chain. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a final slide and kind of a summary, in that, at the top, that's what we've discussed this far. There's a need to understand at a granular level total landed cost to serve for each of our product customer combinations. And that gives us an insight into, understanding the as-is situation and to identify opportunities for improvement. And the opportunities may be investigated, right? Design the supply chain that you'd like to have, where you could be, quantifying this in line with business objectives, evaluating multiple what-if scenarios, and comparing different future states, all of which I think you're going to see in a few minutes, as holistically as possible. Right, so this allows you to understand those trade-offs of inventory costs, service, sustainability for all of these different potential future directions that may be taken. And whether you're looking at the current network or these potential future networks, that deep dive into the inventory policy, the optimization, can then quantify those impacts. And as I said, recommend specific inventory policies to take forward. And the bottom is then just the reminder of, hey, this is the ongoing journey. You often start off with one question, and then you move into another question. And it's an ongoing need to not only answer those questions, but detect changes over time to say, when do I need to reevaluate this? All right, when do I need to reoptimize or realign with the business objectives or the external environment changes that are happening, such that we can make adjustments to policies, understand the trade-offs across the different silos of the supply chain, and put those recommended policies actually into planning systems to make them operational. So I'm now going to pass back to my colleagues at Allers, Miguel, who will present such a journey. It's a great story. It starts with a question of rationalizing a warehousing footprint. And then the next thing you know, you're into inventory optimization and looking at order policies. So it's a great story. And thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Jason. Thank you for this very nice overview of what Lamasoft can do, and it's also pretty much the story on what we have done with this customer. Going into the business case. So hello everyone, my name is Miguel Van As. I'm head of the Allers Data Analytics Services Department. And my job in this webinar is to make everything that we've already discussed. I think Kevin discussed a little bit about the hidden costs of inventory, the need for a holistic view, and then Jason gave a good overview of what the technology we are using today is doing with that. My role will be to make it all a little bit more tangible by showing you a business case. And in this business case, we have optimized quite some working capital and optimized the inventory policies for a chemical distributor. Now, what you need to know about the supply chain before we go into the details is that this company, one of our customers, they buy chemical products from suppliers all over Europe and then store them in their own warehouses and then get them across to the end customer. Now, this is only part of their business because apart from this, they also produce their own chemicals. But this particular business has something that has been historically grown over the years. So historically, they have grown quite an extensive warehouse landscape and a logistic network, making that cost to serve quite high. Also, this supply chain or this network was very much organized in a decentralized way, meaning that every warehouse was in charge of ordering their own amounts, their own inventory policies, but also their own inventory management, resulting in quite an inefficient way of having inventory across the whole network. And then finally, the customer came to us saying like, okay, we have the feeling that for this particular business, our fixed operating costs are getting really high because we have a lot of warehouses and we actually want to make this more lean. And we also don't really know, we don't have a view on where our SKUs are today, in which warehouses, and how it all comes together at the moment. So that was the initial starting point, and it's important to know that that's also how we got into this particular project with this chemical distributor. Now I'm gonna switch the environment and I'm gonna go into our software tool. So Kevin, if you can just give me a quick shout that you can see the demo in presenter mode.
Yes, very clearly.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to the case, I already talked about it. A couple of suppliers present on the map, you see them there throughout Europe, from which we buy chemicals. And these goods are then stored in the own warehouses of our customer. They have a warehouse almost in any significant country or market in Europe where they deliver, and has been increasing quite heavily over the last few years. And then they deliver that to customers on both in the UK and in mainland Europe. So quite an extensive supply chain. And the first thing we tried to do, and that's a little bit in line in what Jason explained, was to have an idea of this total landed cost and being able to understand what the cost is today, but also how we can assign it to certain business units, to certain product types, etc. So that's kind of what you see here. This is an overview of the different cost components, where transportation costs of course, play an important role. I talked about that fixed operating cost already that was increasing. So also that one was a very big one to model. But then again, we also looked into the costs of warehouses themselves, mainly the costs at the 3PL side of business, because all of these warehouses were operated by 3PLs, where we looked at, okay, what is the cost of storing pallets within a warehouse? What does the 3PL charge for that? But also, what are the handling costs for goods coming inbound in our warehouses? What are handling costs from goods going out? And the good thing was, like Jason mentioned, we could assign this to specific product groups or specific SKUs. So for example, if we only want to look at dangerous goods, for example, which is pretty typical in a chemical supply chain, we can filter it. We can see that our cost to serve is now only showing this particular part of business, but we can do exactly the same for individual warehouses. Let's say, so say we want to understand only this part of warehousing in a specific German warehouse, it's also possible. So again, this was the first step. Second step was then to rationalize the network, looking at where can we move now, how can we move now into an optimal situation, mainly looking at the strategic footprint that we wanted to achieve. So if I switch the scenario here, going into optimal scenario, you will see that we have pretty much, we have rationalized the network to quite an extent. We've moved from an initial situation with this whole list of warehouses to now a to-be situation where we have only three, one in the UK, one in Germany, and then one in Spain. And when looking at the costs of this, we saw that in terms of fixed operating cost, we have brought down this operating cost to quite an extent, which was already the first box that we could tick in this project, saying like, okay, this is the setup or the network that we want to move towards, and this is where we want to work towards. Now, as soon as we had the discussion with our customer to make this operational and more tactical, we noticed that there were still some hidden costs that we didn't took into account. And that's a little bit also coming back to the point that Kevin made. Of course, we had the 3PL part of business on inventory and everything taken into account in this model, but when we were looking at individual SKUs and at individual inventory policies, we noticed that we could also improve on working capital, opportunity costs, ordering costs that were actually more specific to the inventory management that has been so decentralized all over all this time. So the best way to illustrate that is when I go into one SKU. This is an overview of one particular SKU. It shows you the inventory situation in any of the warehouses in the European countries. And it gives us an overview of when we have ordered, what our number of orders were, what our levels of inventory were. And when looking at that, we already saw that our inventory was higher than expected. Now, of course, that's something to expect as well, because when you have more warehouses, you need to have higher safety stock levels. So that's why we started working more on this inventory optimization, because we really wanted to understand if we move to a new strategic setup with less warehouses, we want to understand how this would impact our inventory policies. So moving to the scenario for this particular SKU, we could see that when going into a scenario where this product or this individual SKU is stored in only one warehouse, we understood that it was important to balance both the cost of ordering these goods together with the cost of holding these goods. And by using the Lamasoft technology and the algorithms that were behind it, we could easily balance this and understand, okay, this is how many times we are going to order throughout the year, this is how many safety stock we will hold, and this is the policy that we are going to initiate when we are all planning this centrally. Now, of course, that gave us some very beneficial results, because while it was decentralized in the past, we saw that there were a lot of very small orders for which our customer was even fined because they ordered a less than required amount with the supplier. So all of those fines, these were already penalties that we didn't have to pay anymore, because we were now centralizing this way of buying and ordering. But next to that, we also had the opportunity to really understand and to start looking at the value. What value was lying in our warehouses? What cash could we free up by having this new policy? So I'm gonna zoom out again to the full network. Going back maybe first to the initial situation where we saw the total overview of the warehouse network. What we then did was to look at, okay, how much value is lying here? We know that with chemical products, there's a lot of value to any of these products. These are high valued goods. So the cash problem of cash being tied up in the warehouse is also very significant. In this situation, we could select certain warehouses, we could understand the inventory situation in that specific warehouse, but also understand some key policy statistics, like, for example, what is our average inventory? How many days of coverage do we have? What are ideal order quantities? How many orders do we have? What is the safety stock we need? And what is the inventory value lying here? Now, the cool thing, of course, is when we can also understand that in a to-be situation. So when moving from the initial baseline to the optimal scenario, we were again being able to simulate the full network and understand where inventory would lie, which SKUs would be stored where, and how this would be covered. Now, if we look at the bars on the right-hand side, which is showing you the total inventory value throughout our network, we were able to decrease that drastically. So coming back to Kevin's point on hidden costs, that's exactly also a little bit how our project went. First, we started off with modeling costs, total landed cost of the full supply chain, and along the way, by working together with the customer, we understood that there was a lot more value to gain in terms of these inventory value, but also in terms of these fines that we were now avoiding by centralizing the ordering, etc. So for us, this was a very important learning as well. Now, the cool thing about these models and this digital replica of the supply chain is that you cannot just look at this holistically by having less value, but you can also go into detail. You can again slice and dice a little bit like what we did before in the dashboard, what we can understand, okay, for this warehouse, what is lying there, which SKUs, which products, etc. So coming back to my story, and I'm going to switch again back to my PowerPoint presentation. We solved quite some of the challenges that the customer highlighted in the beginning. A lot of the products were again scattered, were historically grown. They didn't really had a clue on what the cost to serve was. There wasn't too much of a holistic view on the total inventory strategy, and we had very high fixed operating costs. Now, by using the Lamasoft technology, we could holistically understand what is happening currently, why we have so high why we have so many warehouses with safety stocks and stock levels that we weren't expecting in the beginning. We could also determine a future strategy based on this total landed costs, but also in this future strategy, drill deeper and understand what policies we would need, how we would need to manage this inventory management, and how we will need to balance ordering and holding costs together. Now, all of these tools or this dashboard was actually made available to our customer and they can now use it as a tool to reinforce their strategic decisions. They can they can manage their change that they need to achieve, because you can imagine that going from a network with more than 20 warehouses to a network with 3, there's a lot of change management involved. But it's these type of tools that support any of these decisions and that also help along the way, because typically this will probably go in different steps in a certain roadmap, and having this tool available, being able to simulate, rerun, re-optimize, reconsider certain business rules helps in achieving these type of to be states. So and then the most important thing, by looking at this not just from a strategic perspective but also from an inventory perspective, we were also able to reduce the working capital, free up the cash that was tied up in the warehouses, and create some visibility on current stock levels and order patterns. So I think, Kevin, that was my part of the webinar, my role. I kindly hand the word back to you,
Yep.
so you can wrap up.
Thank you, Miguel. And before you switch to the next slide,
Yep.
I would like to take this opportunity to already fire a question to you, Miguel.
Yeah.
It's one from the audience, and it's a very interesting question, very important question also. And the question is as follows: what are the data points? How many do you need to be fed into the tool to be able to see the total costs? And actually also what to see the optimization levers. So actually on data collection, let's say.
Yeah. Data collection is always key in these type of exercises. That's something everyone will probably confirm when looking at that. Of course, there are some guidelines in any of the models we develop or any technology that we use. We have a standardized approach of collecting data with our customers. Again, of course, it happens that, I mean, these standardized approaches, they also change depending on the problem that the customer had. So in this particular case, for our customer, we started off with a data set that we put together in validation, which is very important, together with certain stakeholders at the customer site. But along the way, and that's a little bit because of how this project went, we added upon our data set. So it was kind of like a rolling data set that we monitored because certain extra factors came into play. But for your question, typically this is purely transactional data that is in ERP systems, and that can be combined together with any other qualitative or other data set.
So how was the effort? What was the effort from both sides to collect that data? Maybe even also maintain, so updating, monitoring the model?
Well, it's definitely, there are multiple possibilities to feed the models with data. The ultimate goal is, of course, like you mentioned and like Jason mentioned as well, is to have a running digital twin that is updated on a regular basis. And that's from a technology perspective, that's not a problem or not an issue. And there are ways to connect directly to customer system or to ERP systems or whatever. There are ways to integrate that with other business rules or other open data sources. It depends also a little bit on the maturity of the customer. And I think that's the big advantage also of having a logistics service provider being able to work with these kind of tools, because they can quite well estimate what maturity level of the customers are in terms of data management, but also they can support them in any stage, whether they are small and want to start small and just have some visibility, or whether they are already very sophisticated and actually just want some guidance in how to run their models, etc. So there's a very broad spectrum, but I think we fit in within all of these different stages or maturity levels.
Yeah. And maybe also following up on the fact of data collection, maybe this is also a follow-up question for Jason, and that is, what if data simply isn't available, or the organization cannot take this approach? How can this be solved then?
That never occurs, Kevin. It's a absolutely a valid question, and it's a, you know, we're preaching a holistic view. That's the holy grail of what you want to get to. But in reality, you know, the data is spread across disparate systems, the formats are different, etc. So you really have a choice to make. You have a choice of undergoing a larger effort to say, hey, we're going to, you know, go across all of these systems, all of these silos of the supply chain, and bring that data in, right, and work on that. Or based upon the problems that you think you're facing within your silo or within your region, within your data availability that you have access to, you can start there and solve problems as best as you can. That won't be end-to-end supply chain aligned with the entire company, for example, but those quick wins, which I would recommend this approach actually, if you're new to it, is to be able to start small, get some quick wins to really show that you can deliver value to the organization. And from that, it's easier to get the, you know, I would say the other areas of supply chain to sign on and come on board with this type of analysis and be more willing to help with providing data. Because, you know, even within our customer base, we have customers who, you know, they'll have some business units that help out and provide the data, and others that just simply don't. And then finally, there's always just missing data such as transportation rates. There are benchmarks and available data that's out there, you know, and or working with a logistics service provider such as Allers. To give you guys a plug, you of course have visibility in your regions of expertise of, you know, handling costs and warehousing costs.
Yeah. Thanks. As a wrap up, I can add not much more. Actually, it's clear that we set up the scene a little bit on okay, what is inventory management and inventory optimization, but also what is a possible solution, what is the way forward, and this taking into account the very big and rapid steps that the technology is taking. Certainly at Lamasoft, we see that this is taking up very rapidly, very swiftly. Not only talking about descriptive, but also prescriptive, and even with AI technology, this this sounds like a very interesting time, very big opportunities to go fast, and yeah, let's say that with the build-up and the start, but also the proceeding of having that supply chain, that digital twin of your supply chain into place, is actually a work in progress. It is not from day one that you have that, certainly not. On the other hand, it's also something that you really should start, albeit small. As Miguel said, you can start very small with some filling in templates, some extraction of data from your ERP system, even accounting system. Let's say being a logistic service provider, we know a lot about what the other KPIs and what the other leading indicators can be. So this is actually really on inventory optimization, very big in terms of having that module in place, but also calling on that module, calling on the module to also unlock those hidden costs. And really go forward, check out what the true cost or the true landed cost is, and that is actually what we really see in all the projects that we do with customers. Now, looking at the chat, it is already let's say busy, and we already addressed some questions. Again, maybe to Miguel or myself, but let's say Miguel, you can start off. It is again the question of how long did it take to scope? How long did it take to collect the data? And how long did it take to build a model to a point of being able to present to whatever stakeholder that you have, being it external or internal.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, when looking at this type of projects, there, I mean, collecting data, you might think that this would go very fast. You just collect data and you start modeling, but there are of course some crucial steps to take in this process, because there's a lot about data validation with different stakeholders. People need to look at data. ERP systems can already have some bad data in it, so there is already a cleaning step and an enriching step up front. And then, of course, it's not just about data in these type of models, but also in understanding what are current business rules, what are current policies, how does this work typically in process-wise, what are the ins and outs of this specific business, because also, like, for example, chemicals with high-value chemicals is something completely different than FMCG or anything else. But I would say getting the data, putting it into a model, making sure that everything is validated, you should be able to do that in 1 or 2 months. And then the fun part starts. Then you can start building upon it. You can start questioning it. You can start reusing it. And ideally, it becomes a running thing that you can keep using throughout your supply chain management job. And I think Jason talked about apps. You can start building apps of that data model for recurring problems that are occurring. You can start using your models for different questions. So that's when the fun part starts.
Yeah, going back to your showcase, your business case, that is actually what the customer now expect. They want a platform, a simple platform with that interactive dashboard, because behind it is that very intricate Llamasoft engine. And so you see that the customer, they ask us, okay, this was done on a data set maybe up until now, 2019, 2020. Let's do it now on maybe even forecasted data. And that is now, like you said, Miguel, where the fun begins, because then you can really see, not in hindsight, but a little bit more in the future, okay, what is then expected into the network? What will change? What can we expect? What can we, how can we be ready to maybe even switch on or switch off some other factors, some other details, some other warehouses, have that in a contingency plan. So that is actually what we're saying. You have a couple of months of setting that up, and it's not only the model, it's also workshops to understand really the business case, also the business needs. And then as of that, it is not something that you did one time and you can practically put it into a closet. It's something that can be re-questioned, revisited, and just feeding the data into the model gives you another result, another map, another cost structure, even other inventory policies. So yeah, you're absolutely right on the fact that it's not ending. It's not a one-time thing. It is a recurring model. It's also one of the questions of the audience. Maybe that's one can be also addressed to Jason, where the question is that the Llamasoft optimization model, solving for both the network design and the inventory policies, is that at the same time, or is it done in steps? Do you first optimize the network design, and then you secondly you optimize the inventory policy, given that fixed network structure?
Mm-hmm. It's typically done in steps. However, to be very clear, it's all on a single data model, where the network optimization will be utilizing particular columns of the data model and applying its techniques to answer the questions that you're asking of it, such as, you know, what's the minimum number of warehouses, or what would it look like to add 3 warehouses? Where would I potentially move the inventory? And then the inventory approach then goes to another level of granularity to answer those specific questions across safety, stock, and policies. So it's not a simultaneous, we're going to determine the optimal flow mathematically and the inventory policies simultaneously. It's a two-step process, but it's really nice having it in the same tool, in the same data set, where you're really bouncing through those, right? And even going back and forth or sequencing those is not a problem.
Yeah, it was also shown by Miguel in the demo that by selecting other scenarios gives the other results, but also gives that typically also simulation of the inventory policy and also of the network design. So let's say backend, it is in two steps, but then given that fixed network, but you have multiple scenarios, multiple fixed network structures, I think this is really where then the sensitivity can act up, and where actually the stakeholders of the company can make the decision on, and then say, okay, let's see what scenario we are going for, but also let's analyze it based on other scenarios, based on maybe things that can happen. And then again, with that optimization model in place, you have that simultaneous result that is shown in an environment like Tableau or Power BI, for example.
I think, Kevin, if I could add one more thing.
Yeah.
Of course, in any design exercise or the strategic analysis, there are always inventory components that come into play. I think that was also the case in the demo. So you cannot really run a strategic model without taking some inventory components into play, but really drilling down on SKU level and really policy level of how much safety stock do we need to keep, when do I order, that becomes more of a second stage problem to address after the strategic simulation or the strategic.
I have a final question, and it's a good one, and I kept it for the last because I am looking at the clock. We're very much on time, so thank you for that. But a question here popped up is, what is the data? What about another example? For example, in a company that increases the network and the number of warehouses. Could you use Llamasoft to better manage it and optimize that inventory across all warehouses? Maybe Miguel can start.
Definitely, because that's the whole point. There's so much complexity about supply chains and modeling that there is not just an answer like decreasing a network is good or increasing a network is good. It's all depending on the business case, your specific business, your required service levels, your way of putting goods or your route to market, let's say. So in this particular case, we went from historically grown to more lean, but we have seen projects with other customers, other businesses, where the reverse step or the reverse journey was more convenient because of transportation costs that were getting way too high, or there wasn't too much of fixed operating costs. The ratio between service levels were way too important in the network, meaning that we wanted to be close to the customer. So also there, the technology can be leveraged. So it's very much a situational thing. And this is not a webinar to make sure that the hypothesis of making your supply chain more lean is the way to go. It was the way to go in this case, but it's never the one answer that is out there.
Yeah. So actually, Jason, to conclude, maybe to you, Llamasoft is actually also producing greenfield, but also gravity analysis, looking at the best location, and again, starting from that, like you said, two-step process. Again, do the simulations and see what then the actual results on inventory, but also on network design.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there are use cases right today of moving from, I would say, current models, if we think in the retail industry, of moving into smaller store formats, where all of a sudden you're starting to proliferate your inventory locations to meet those service levels. So there's, I think retail is a definite example where that applies.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that this will end our webinar. I'm looking at the clock and it's perfectly on time, 2 o'clock, like we envisioned. So I would like to thank my co-speakers, Miguel van As and Jason Flake, for joining us here in this webinar, giving some insight to the audience. And yeah, not forget to thank our audience again, to patiently listen to us, see what you had to say, look at the demo, and take some insights with them. Whenever you have some questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We're more than happy to answer or to help out where we can. So from my side, a very big thank you to all.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.